Hi, welcome to Concordia's weekly message. My name is Richard. I'm the pastor here at Concordia. I wanted to take a moment at the beginning to introduce myself because some of you are tuning in for the very first time. We're in a series right now on starting the new year right. And today we're going to talk about relationships. Now, relationships is a big topic. We're going to scratch the surface, and we're going to talk about one thing in this conversation that if we work on that, it can really help us make an immediate difference. There's also going to be some things that we're going to spend some time working on it right now in the middle of this conversation. So I would really encourage you to hit pause and spend some time in those spots where we're working on it, because it's really going to benefit you to do that. Another thing that'll benefit you, you'll find this in the description of this video, is a Bible guide that goes a little deeper in some other things that God says about what we're going to talk about today. You can access that by, again, going to that link. And one of the best things you can do is do it by yourself, do it with your family, do it with someone on Zoom or FaceTime. And if you need help getting connected with people on Zoom, we can do that for you. There's some singing elements that we've added at the beginning, at the end of this weekly message, because in COVID-19 times, some people feel most comfortable just worshiping at home. So we wanted you to have that part of the experience as well. For those giving financially, here at Concordia, thank you. It helps us do the work that God's given us to do. But the reason we talk about money is not because it's something that we say, oh, we're doing this because the church needs money, or we're doing this because we can give to make God like us more. We believe at Concordia that generosity is something that's really close to the heart of God. And that's why I want to always encourage you to give, and to give somewhere where your heart is. That might be a cause in your community. That might be a church that you're going to. If you're connected with Concordia, it might be Concordia here. And if you are giving at Concordia, or if you feel led to give at Concordia, then you'll see across the screen some ways that you can give securely through some of our online platforms. Again, thanks for tuning in to this weekly message. We're going to get started with some of those singing elements, and then I'll be back to lead you through this conversation. God bless.
enough for me. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough. Heaven reaches out to us. Your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough. I'm covered in your love. Your grace is enough for me.
When did we forget how to love? Did it happen suddenly? Or was it a gradual decline? When did we forget the very foundation of the gospel? For God so loved. Love is what moved God to action. Love is what held Jesus to the cross. Love is what rolled away the stone. But we've forgotten that part. Without love, we are simply a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal, a bunch of noise. Without love, we are nothing. Is that what people see in us? Meaningless, empty noise? Love is supposed to be patient and kind, gentle, not angry or arrogant. Yet in our effort to stand on truth, we have forgotten the very thing these truths are based on. Love. Never once did Jesus fail in this. Not in his heartbreak or his anger. Not in his joy or his betrayal. His default has always been love. Maybe it's time the church was more like Jesus.
You know, that video was right. Church should be about love. And relationships in church should be about love, and relationships in general should be about love. Not necessarily the mushy, gushy, emotional kind of love, but loving like Jesus loved. Love with actions. Love by serving and even sacrificing for others. Love by committing to the relationship at all costs and despite the costs. Love by considering others before thinking of self. Now that's the way it should be. Okay, God designed it that way, but that's not the way it is for for a whole lot of people in a whole lot of places, maybe not even in your house or your church. Relationships are complicated. And complicated means they're often kind of messy. All right? Feelings get hurt, egos get bruised. People don't get what they think they should from the relationship, and they throw things into the relationship that they shouldn't. And you'd think maybe that having all this time together in COVID would make that maybe a little better, would fix some of that. But statistically, it hasn't worked out either. Statistically, 2020 has been kind of a hard year for relationships. And being stuck together hasn't made things more sticky. It's just made people more stuck. And the crud's just kind of built up. It hasn't been cleaned up. It hasn't even been worked on. It's just piling up more and more. And you just feel like screaming, unless you're just kind of numb to it all. There is a better way. There is a better way. Now, as I said, relationships are complicated, but God does complicate it. All right? God took chaos and confusion, and from that, he made a universe. And the laws of physics and chemistry, they work because God set them up that way. And the laws of biology and life science and life systems, they work because God designed them that way. And the broken relationship that we had with God that we broke and we couldn't fix, God found a way, did a miracle to fix that anyway. So yeah, God knows complicated. God does complicate it, and that means that God can also show us how to work our way through those often complicated relationships and make them work better too. Now, there's a whole lot of facets to relationships, and we're not going to talk about all of them right now. In today's conversation, we're going to zero in on one thing that I think if we work at it and we make even little changes right now, we can start to see a big difference in how our relationships work. Here's what we're going to work at. The way we use our words. The way we use our words, because lots of times it's our words that ends up causing the hurt in the relationship, right? I mean, once said, the words can't be unsaid. And once said, they can't be unheard, which means it's just, the hurt's out there. And sometimes the pain lingers, and sometimes it even explodes. Our words make things explode like they did this week at the Capitol. I mean, in this conversation, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some things that can stop the hurt. And also some ways that we can use our words to help and to encourage and to heal. To help and to encourage and to heal. Does that sound good? Sounds good to me. All right, we're going to get into some things God says about that in a minute. But first, here's one of those spots that I told you about that we want to do a little work on that first. I want you to hit pause and just spend a couple minutes reflecting on this. What about your words causes issues in relationships more? Is it what you say, or is it how you say it? Do that now. Okay, here's some of the things that God has to say about using our words. I'm reading for what a guy named Paul wrote in a letter he titled Ephesians. It's from Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 26. Don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And do not bring sorrow to God's Spirit by the way you live. Remember, He has identified you as His own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. All right, that's what God said. Let's kind of dig into that, like one piece at a time. Nobody's a stranger to bad words, are they? I mean, even if we don't want to say things that hurt other people, we do. Sometimes we do that a lot, right? So where does that come from? Well, a lot of times when we say things that hurt other people, I think it's because we're angry, isn't it? I mean, it's our anger and our frustration, and it's out of that anger and frustration that we strike out and say things that are better left unsaid. And we say them in ways that would be much better received if they were just toned down a little bit. Right? Anger is a big issue when it relates to our words, which is why God tells us here, again, let me read verse 26, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down where you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. Now, what God's saying here is he's recognizing that anger is a valid emotion, but when anger controls you, or when anger controls your actions, it ends up leading to bad behavior here. So the warning is, when you're angry, and understand you will be angry, okay? When you're angry, don't let the anger that you feel rising up in you boil over. Don't let it control you. Don't say something hurtful or just plain stupid just because you're angry. Now, there's a subtle temptation here that I think we all kind of have, and the temptation is this. It's to think that my anger is righteous or justified. You know, that's, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000,000 times, will you ever get it right? And that your anger is bad form or bad temper. Okay, here's the truth. That most of the time, both my anger and your anger are both bad form and bad temper and frustration and really a lack of humility. You know, this, I'm right, you're wrong, why do I have to put up with this? And in fact, it's not just bad form. Another word for that sort of, I'm always right, why do I have to put up with this self-righteousness, is sin. Right? It's sin. And that's why what God's warning us against here, which is why let me read this again. He says, anger gives the devil a foothold. And guys, when the devil gets a foothold, he exploits it. And usually then, when he exploits it, things get rather messy. And God doesn't want that for you. And frankly, you don't want that for you either. You don't really want to give the devil that kind of a foothold, do you? That just leads to more mess and more pain. Right? So to stop that kind of hurt before it starts, and to stop saying hurtful things before you do, here's kind of some reading between the lines tips about controlling our anger, where a lot of that bad words come from. Right? The first one's this. Just kind of understand what your own triggers are. You know, those things that habitually frustrate you, that bother you, that make you mad, that get you saying so much hurtful stuff. Sometimes, here's how it works for me. Sometimes when you recognize those triggers, you can avoid saying anything further. You can just say, oh, here's that trigger coming. You make a little joke to yourself like, oh, here's that thing. Okay, I know he doesn't mean it. I know he's not trying to do it. I know he's just forgetting it. It's really not that big a deal. And if I recognize that trigger, a lot of times I can just the anger will start blowing away before it really grabs a hold of me and before I end up saying something that's going to hurt. The second thing you can do is really sense when you feel that the anger is rising. Now, most of the time you can do that, can't you? You can really sense when you're starting to get angry, and you're getting angrier and angrier, and you know you should stop it, but sometimes you just kind of go with it. You're like, let it simmer. Let it stew like it's some sort of spice that's going to make the relational soup taste better. You know, that works with chili. All right, that's what I love, leftover chili. The spices kind of set in for a day or two, and they go through the whole chili, and it makes leftover chili awesome. All right, but anger, simmering in relationships, not so much. Right? Nursing your anger to keep it warm really isn't wise policy, because anger isn't a spice, it's an accelerant. All right, and that's why we read in the Message. I'm going to read this from different translations. Same thing from the Message this time. Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life. And so that the third thing with that, don't stay angry, don't go to bed angry, is number 3, figure out how to release it before you explode. All right? You know, if you have a balloon and you keep blowing it and blowing it and blowing it up because you want it to be really, really big, you keep blowing, eventually it's gonna pop. And it's gonna make a big noise and might hurt your face, and be better if you see it getting to the point of bursting that you just let the air out. Or same thing like with water balloons, right? When I play with water balloons, I like to make them really, really big, right? Because I want the other person to get really, really wet. So as you're filling it though, and you notice the balloon's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, if you don't stop, you might end up having the mess all over yourself instead. All right, anger works the same way. Right? It builds up and it builds up and it builds up, but eventually it gets too much. And things just explode, and the relationship can't take it. You have a real mess. Unless you stop putting more in before you get to that breaking point. And again, I think that's why God says, let me read it again from another translation. Don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of a foothold in your life. What God's saying is deal with it before it bursts. Or, frankly, before you hurt yourself in the process. That can actually happen, you know. Unintended consequences when you're just kind of letting off steam of what you think is your righteous anger. It's kind of like not reading the warning on the Instapot label that says, hey, this pressure release valve, don't look at it. Don't really come anywhere near it. It's hot. It's gonna burn you. But you're like, well, I don't know. How does this thing work? And so you get too close and ouch. Right? Anger release ought to come with a similar warning label. If you stare at it, the release of your anger, in some kind of morbid fascination, because you want to see like how it's all going to come out, you're probably going to end up getting burned too. Which again is why Paul says, repeat it one more time, don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of a foothold in your life. Again, let's do a little bit of work on that right now. Pause and reflect on these couple of things. What's one non-hurtful way to release your anger in the beginning, when you just feel it starting? And what's one non-hurtful way to release your anger as it's rising, but before it boils over? Again, do that right now. I hope that little reflection was helpful for you. I know that it was for me, because here's what I was thinking about as I was going in, reflecting on my own life in that pause time. Sometimes when I feel the anger rising, I find for me it's best just to walk away. just to walk away and go do something else or go and be somewhere by myself for a while. It's what I call my frozen moment. It's like, let it go, let it go. It's because what I found for me is that if I can just let that moment pass, if I can just walk away and be by myself somewhere and not say something dumb in anger that can't be taken back, a little bit later I've just kind of calmed down and I'm thinking, what in the world was I getting so angry about? What in the world were we fighting about anyway? And I've saved myself a lot of relational pain just by walking away and not saying something hurtful or dumb. The other thing I started thinking about is sometimes I simply ask myself, like, why am I angry? Why is that such a big deal? And a lot of times, if I stop to think, why is it such a big deal? What I find for me is, a lot of times it really isn't. And again, if I say, well, this really isn't a big deal, it's going to stop me from saying something stupid before I do. Third thing I do and made me think of is in my reflective moments, and I got to tell you, unfortunately, those are way too few and far between. But when I really get down and reflecting on that, I also pray about it. I say, God, I don't want to be angry. I don't know why I'm so angry about that. Would you help me with that? Would you help me release it, please? And you know what? I've found that when I pray that, he actually does. He actually helps me. Because God doesn't want the devil getting a foothold in my relationships or in my life. So if I ask him, he's going to help me through that. That's one way to avoid the hurt that words can cause, is to find healthy ways to deal with your anger. All right, the second big thing is simply to watch the way that you talk. Watch the way that you talk. And there's a couple of really important things to keep in mind here that I'm gleaning out of this text. The first is this: do no harm. Right? It's like the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have. The first thing they tell the doctor is, do no harm. Would our relationships work better if we did the same thing with our words? God thinks so. And that's why he wrote down at verse 29, don't say anything that would hurt another person. That's from the God's Word translation. All right, think about it. How much hurt would we avoid for ourselves or others if before saying something out loud, I just stopped long enough to ask myself, is it hurtful? Is it hurtful? Or could it be hurtful? And if the answer is yes, or even if it's maybe or possibly, then check my words and leave them unsaid. First, do no harm. The second thing is, with watching my words, take out the trash. Take out the trash. So there's a reason that the trash can inside the house gets taken out to the bigger container outside the house. It's not just because if you don't, the mess is piling up. It's also because things get rotten and they start to stink. Well, it works that way with some of the words we use too, doesn't it? We can try to pretend they're not a problem, but the truth is, some of them, they just stink. And they stink up the whole relationship. Kind of like you're going into the cupboard for some potatoes that evening and you're reaching into that 10-pound sack that's been there for a while and something doesn't smell right. And then you start to look in there and you're like, oh, there's a rotten one. And that rotten one's starting to get over the potatoes around it, and it just smells bad, and you got to throw the whole thing out right away. I mean, that's the way it is with some of the words that we use on a regular basis. All right? We have to get rid of them. We have to get rid of them, or guaranteed we are going to have a relational mess, and things are really going to start to stink. And God knows that too. Right? Which is why a couple sentences later, Paul writes this. Verse 31. Here's from God's Word translation. Get rid of your bitterness, hot tempers, anger, loud quarreling, cursing, and hatred. Here's the same thing from the New Living Translation. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil. Here's the same thing from the Message translation. Make a clean break with all cutting, backbiting, and profane talk. Now, I read several different translations here just to give you the idea that each of those translations gives you a little different nuance to help you understand what Paul means here by trash talk. Trash talk isn't just coarse or obscene or foul language. It is that. All right? But it's also harshness. We don't usually think of harshness as trash talk, but Paul says it is. Trash talk's also like flying off the handle, whether you have a reason to or not. Trash talk's name calling, both the kind that's intended to hurt and get this, even the kind that's not intended to hurt, the kind maybe you're saying as a joke, still trash talk, still hurts anyway. Let me give you an example of that second one. Back when we were young, I remember my sister one time doing something kind of silly, and she was just talking to herself and said, "Oh, you dummy." And my brother and I, being a little obnoxious once in a while, we thought, well, if she calls herself dummy, we can too. My sister wasn't a dummy. She was one of the smartest people that I know. But we just took up to calling her dummy like all the time, like way too much. And we didn't really mean anything bad by that, but it had to hurt. And it was bad. It was trash talk. We just needed to throw it out. Here's what else trash talk is. Trash talk is what I might call contemptuous talk, or looking down at your nose at face at somebody else talk, or contemptuous tone. Trash talk is also the sort of biting sarcasm that makes the other person feel about an inch or two tall while you're trying to build yourself up, and your zinger's just rolling off the tongue. That kind of sarcasm, guys, it might be a talent, but sarcasm is not a spiritual gift. All right? Here's the problem with all this kind of trash talk. It breeds more. You know how it goes, don't you? Someone uses those kind of words on you, and what do? Right? You want to use those kind of words on them back. And then they hear them, and they use them back on you, and then you use them back on them, and pretty soon the relationship is a real mess. Paul's saying don't let that happen. Paul's saying watch yourself and listen to yourself. And if something's rotten or bitter or sour in your words, take out the trash. All right, take out the trash talk, take out the trash looks, take out the trash tone, get rid of it all. Now here's a intermediate step in that direction. Something you can do right now. Stay silent. Did your mom tell you the same thing my mom told me? If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. All right, mom's saying, but it actually works. It actually does. Guys, it is much better to say it in your head than to say it out loud. I mean, we want to get to the place where we're not even saying it in our head. But when you don't say it out loud, you're going to do a whole lot less relational harm. So start there. Start there. Stay silent. And one more piece of advice in that regard. If someone's walking away and you think you kind of hear something, but you didn't really hear it, and maybe it was just a little mumble or something, it's just don't push them. When they're angry, let them walk away and deal with their own anger. If you push and push and push in a moment of anger, you might push them into saying something they can't unsay and you can't unhear. Let me give you an example of that one. Again, from my own life. I was in a college counseling class, and that particular night, I remember not really wanting to be in that particular night class that night. And the prof was going through this whole exercise and getting in touch with your feelings. And he kept pushing and saying, but how are you feeling right now? And I was just kind of deflecting things and tried to say nothing, or okay, not bad. But he was just digging for more. And he kept digging and saying, no, but how are you feeling? And finally, I said, well, I guess I really don't want to be here right now. Now, that was a jerk answer that I couldn't unsay and he couldn't unhear. It caused a little stress, a lot of stress among us for a little bit of time. I mean, we worked it out in the end and things worked out okay, but at that particular moment, maybe it would have been better for both of us just to kind of let it go. Right? My advice, sometimes even if you don't feel like it, you got to let someone else be silent for a while too, so that the trash talk doesn't make a home in your relationship. And so you don't have to try to clean up a bigger mess than if something had just been left unsaid and unheard. All right, again, let's take a few minutes to just work on that a little bit right now. Pause and reflect, based on the things we've just been talking about. What is the trash talk or trash tone that you're using right now that needs to be taken out? What's that trash talk or trash tone that needs to be taken out of your language? Think about it, identify it, and then also do this. Take a moment before you hit play again to pray about it. To ask God, help me deal with this. Help me get rid of this trash talk in my life, in my vocabulary. Because you know what? He wants to do that. God doesn't want to give the devil an opportunity to mess with your relationship. Do those things now. Okay, words can hurt relationships. We know that. We've experienced it. We know we need to get rid of the words that do, and to do that, we need to deal with our anger, and we need to take out the trash. And we've seen in this conversation a few things that can help us to do that. But the other big thing that God wants us to see here is that he can actually help us to replace those bad words with better ones, to words that we can use regularly and frequently, consistently to help, to encourage, and to heal. Just let that sink in for a minute. Words that help and encourage and heal. How much do you hear them? How much do you say them? And what difference would it make in your relationships if there were more of those kind of words going around? I mean, again, God knows that it would make a really big difference. And that's why Paul writes here, verse 29, I'm reading this time from the New Living Translation. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Those words that are good and helpful and encouragement, they have the idea there of building up or holding up, kind of like an infrastructure in a building that supports the building and keeps it from falling down. What Paul's saying there is that we need that sort of infrastructure in our lives too. And it's those helpful and encouraging words that are going to do that for us. That we need to say those helpful and encouraging words to others, and we need to hear those words from others too in a variety of ways and way more frequently than we're used to, because life's hard, right? And relationships are complicated, and sometimes the load in both of them is rather heavy. And what God's telling us here is that encouraging words hold the other person up, and encouraging words hold the relationship up, so that neither one comes crashing down under the weight of life. I got to tell you that for me and my wife, that's been just absolutely crucial for us during this COVID year. And for those of you who've been some of those encouraging people and spoken those encouraging words into our lives at different times, guys, thank you. It has been a godsend. That's what Paul's talking about. I've lived through that encouraging words hold us up. And helpful words, they're the things that the other person needs at the moment. Notice I said, not what you need, right? That's where trash talk usually comes from. When I need to express my anger or my frustration at you or at this situation, which usually ends up with what? Right? Hurting, not helping the relationship. Some of that trash talk coming back in. Helpful words are spoken based on the needs of the other person. What do they need to be built up? What do they need to be supported? What do they need to survive? What do they need to be able to take the next step? And it's not just the words that are spoken either, it's the feeling behind them and the tone that they're delivered with. Let me take you to the next verse, verse 32. The Message translation says it this way: be gentle with one another, sensitive. New Living Translation says, instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted. Gentle, sensitive, tender-hearted. A words, a tone that say, I'm here, I understand, I sympathize, I'm here for you, I want the best for you. I want you to feel the best that you can about yourself. Helpful words are spoken to encourage and to give courage. Helpful words are spoken to lift up and to build up. They're spoken to help, to give help or to hope to people when they need it. They're spoken to provide healing when the relationship needs it. Now understand, that doesn't come naturally for us. Research shows that even the most positive of people generally use a lot more negative than positive words during the day. Trash talk comes easy. Encouraging does not. So what we have to do is we have to train ourselves to use words that help, that encourage, that lift up, that build up, that heal. So again, let's start right now. Pause and reflect to work on this in this moment. Who do you know that needs an encouraging word today? How are they going to hear that in a way that's, they're going to hear it as encouragement? And what can I do to give that sort of encouragement today? Relationships can be messy sometimes, can't they? And they're complicated pretty much all the time. But remember, God does complicate it. And that means He can show us how to make our often complicated relationships work better. What we've seen in this conversation today is that in relationships, words really matter. They matter a lot. Because once spoken, they can't be unsaid. And they can't be unheard. They can either tear relationships down or they can build relationships up. Now, personally, for me, I'm going to opt for building relationships up. And where there's been hurt, to bring hope and healing back into the mix. Now, from this conversation, it's made me think that to do that, I got to work at, number one, getting my anger under control. I got to work, number two, at taking out the trash that's been working its way into my speech. I got to work, number three, at using words that are helpful and uplifting and encouraging a whole lot more frequently. But I've also got to do something else. All right, and this is important. I've got to do one more thing. And it's something that if it's missing, all those other things we've been talking about today aren't really going to amount to much. Now, I've alluded in this conversation many times to words that bring healing where there's been hurt, but I haven't really identified what those words are. Okay? here they are now. Now, don't miss this. 3 little words. Okay, ready for it? Here they come. I forgive you. Okay, they're out there. I forgive you. Now let's talk about how we work that into our relationships. All right, now most people say, well, I might say I forgive you if, and usually only if you say I'm sorry first. Now that might be how we feel, and it's probably how we act most of the time, but real healing doesn't work that way. Right? Sometimes for relationships to heal, the I forgive you has to come first. Now, I know that sounds so not right, but it's also so true. And it's exactly how Jesus operated with us. The same guy, Paul, that we've been reading from his letters today, wrote another letter to some friends in Rome. And in that book, Romans chapter 5, verse 8, he says this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Let me repeat that. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now here's what he's saying. Jesus loved us. Jesus came to earth for us. Jesus died on a cross for us. With his innocent suffering and death, Jesus purchased forgiveness of sins for us. Jesus even spoke words of forgiveness from the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he did that all before any single one of us ever took a single step in his direction. Before many of us even knew there was a problem. Before many of us even knew that the relationship was broken and that it was broken because of what we did and couldn't fix. Before any of that, Jesus took a step toward us and he started the forgiveness. Why? Because Jesus loved us and he wanted our relationship to get fixed. And he wanted to be able to be better moving forward, and that's what it was going to take. Him going first. Him acting first, him speaking first, him forgiving first, him loving first. Now, how does that translate into our relational stuff and how the words in our relationships matter? Let me take you back to what Paul wrote. The end of verse 32 and the start of chapter 5 is from the Message translation. Forgive one another as quickly and thoroughly as God in Christ forgave you. Watch what God does, and then you do it, like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. Mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious, but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but in order to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. Now, loving like that and forgiving as quickly and thoroughly as God in Christ forgave you, that means thinking of the relationship first. It means giving like Jesus. It means serving and sacrificing like Jesus. It means humbling yourself like Jesus. It means forgiving like Jesus. Right? It means acting like Jesus, even when you don't feel like it. And sometimes it means saying, I forgive you, before you ever hear the words, I'm sorry. The reality for most of us is sometimes, maybe even most of the times, is you may not feel like saying those words to start the healing process. You may not feel any of that kind of love at all. You may feel that the other person's words have hurt you more, and that because they have, they're going to have to go first if any sort of healing's going to happen. And then you know what happens? Nothing. Usually, absolutely nothing. Because both people are waiting. And waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And as a result, the hurt is still there. And the mess is still there, and the trash is still there, and the stink is building and building and building, and nothing's getting better, because both people are still too stubborn to take that step, too stubborn to go first, too stubborn to say those healing words, "I forgive you," before the other person says what you want to hear them say. Well, remember the video at the beginning that said the church ought to love more like Jesus, and that relationships work better when you love like Jesus? I want you to think about this. I don't think that Jesus necessarily felt like going through all the pain and the suffering and the hurt of the cross. In fact, I seem to recall him asking the Father, is there another way? Is there a way to do the same thing that's less painful, that's not going to cost me quite as much? But you know what? He still went through with it, didn't he? Jesus still went to the cross willingly and deliberately and voluntarily because we matter to him. Because the relationship mattered to him. Because we matter to him and we're more important to him than his own rights and privileges. See, Jesus wanted our relationship to heal. He knew it was broken. He knew it was a mess. He knew we couldn't fix it. And so out of love, he acted. And he acted first. He made the first move. He took the first steps. He took steps to repair the mess that we never could. Now, I don't really know how he felt, but I know what he did. And what he did was that Jesus initiated forgiveness before we ever asked for it. Right? If you want your relationships to heal, love like that. Love like Jesus. Live like Jesus. Forgive like Jesus. Have the same attitude as Jesus. Imitate Jesus. That's what makes relationships work right. That's what helps struggling relationships get better. That's what brings healing where there's been hurt. And that's what enables us to more frequently use those kind of words that help and encourage and heal instead of those that hurt. Again, you may not feel like it, all right? Do it anyway. Make a decision, make a choice to heal. Make a decision, make a choice to get better. Make a decision, make a choice for the relationship. Make a decision, make a choice for love. And as we wrap this up, then let this question kind of spin around in your spirit. Who do you need to speak those healing words to today? And what are you waiting for?
every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. So open up the gates, make a way before the King of Kings. God who comes to save, He's here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and